Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the 1,775 poems of the Johnson edition of Emily Dickinson's poetry. We now turn to poem 19 in that edition, a sepal, petal, and a thorn. Now right away, I want to thank the small Emily group that has been helping me already of high school students, and especially of that group. I want to say special thanks to Bear, Nelson, Grisbowsley, and Rutledge. Your comments to me about this poem have been brilliant and very helpful. I'm going to call this poem, and then I'll explain why later, that this is Emily's quest for ontological perspicacity. Now, we already know about our big five as we've commented in our introductory set of comments, and our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. And in that intro lecture, you'll remember that we said that Emily is always dancing, caper will be the phrase of this, the word of this poem, always dancing with what we call our big five. Epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are. That will be significant for this poem. Psychology, the study of the individual mind. Sociology, study of the collective mind. And then, of course, the question of theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in the world, and what is its value? And I think there will be a whole lot of that happening here as well. Perspicacity is that word that we borrow from our study of Plato's Republic. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. The idea of insight, the idea of understanding, the idea of figuring stuff out for oneself. And I think that Emily's going to be playing that game in so many of her poems, but for sure in this set of lines. Now, the background here is the question, maybe, what am I or who am I? Again, the ontological question. And we're going to come back to Emily's love of gardening and her love of flowers as we will enjoy this poem. Of course, sepal will be that outside part of the flower, yes. And of course, the flower of all flowers in this poem will be the rose. A sepal, petal, and a thorn upon a common summer's morn. A flask of dew, a bee or two, a breeze, a caper in the trees, and I'm a rose. Now, there's a whole lot, I think, going on in this poem, and again, my Emily group has helped me to see so much of what I'm going to try to help you guys see now. That is to say, notice, we will begin with observing a flower, and of course, because it's a thorn, we're going to assume a rose. At the conclusion of the poem, it's a rose. Sepal, of course, is a technical language. And if we ask, why would Emily use technical language? Some of you now Googling to make sure you know what sepal is, because you'll have forgotten from your biology class, it's those leaves on the outside, right? That green, if you will, that green area, as opposed to the red of the rose itself. Why would Emily use this kind of specialized language? One argument is she's showing off, but I think I agree more with my Emily group on this. I don't think she's showing off. It's just that I think she assumes everybody knows what a sepal is. She doesn't spend a lot of time with other people to be able to use language, and they go, what is sepal? What is that? And then she has to explain it. And then she all of a sudden goes, oh yeah, some people don't know what that is. She assumes a certain knowledge of, well, the world, and especially botany. Notice in this poem the way that Emily, once again, will dance from the physical to the metaphysical, back and forth. She has such congruence between those two elements of what we will call Platonic theory of the forms, the two-box theory of Republic 6. The petal, and then, of course, the thorn. Now, let's go ahead and tackle what we're doing here with this word thorn. Well, obviously, the thorn, the rose and the thorn go together. There's no question there. Of course, notice right away the trinities of the first line. So you got sepal, you got petal, you got thorn. And all of a sudden, once we're thinking of trinities, and we're going back, of course, to the previous poem 18, and our assumption is that you've already played that game at learnstrong.net in the chats with Emily. The Gentian weaves her fingers, her fringes. There's this question then about what's going on with the trinities and then with thorn, and immediately we get to that. Oh yeah, that is to say the thorn, the thorns of Christ, the halo of thorns on his head, pre-crucifixion and of course during crucifixion, that becomes a powerful icon. And the fact that we will end with the rose will take us to Dante and the Divine Commedia and the multifoliate rose that, of course, Dante will play with, and then T.S. Eliot will pick up with in poems like Hollow Men. And so all of a sudden we go, Oh, okay. So the rose becomes really symbolic on so many levels. But notice it's upon a common summer's morn. Now I will ask you, what's up with the word common? Some of you will say average, some of you will say predictable. That is to say, what is it that makes great poets? They take the average, they take the common. We learned this, of course, in Shelley's Defense of Poetry, right? And they make us see again what we have not seen before. And I'm fascinated that that's exactly the game that she's playing. In other words, in one way, she's going to say, I'm common, I'm a rose. Then, third line, a flask of dew. By the way, originally there is some belief that maybe this word flask was flash. And it works either way. A flask of dew, notice now our trinities here. A bee or two, a breeze, and then a caper in the trees. Now, again, caper may not be a word that you guys know. Most of Emily's audience would know this word. And if you're Googling it now, and I hope that you are, you're discovering, of course, the idea of caper as dance, right? That is to say, rhythmic movement. We will see this, by the way, in poem 208. So I'll just play it because I love to forecast what we have coming. Poem 208 of the Johnson edition. The rose did caper on her cheek, her bodice rose and fell. And of course, we'll comment on her use of the word rose there. And obviously, we'll see that later. This notion of breeze is a dancing, right? A beautiful dancing in the trees. And then the last line, and I arose. Two questions I'll ask of you to consider. Why did she use the word and? Why not just read it as a bee or two, a breeze, a caper in the trees, I'm a rose? Why the use of the word and? I think it may have something to do with the rhythm that she's trying to establish. And why is it not I am, but rather the contraction of I'm a rose? I think she's trying to be colloquial. I think she's trying to suggest that she wants to be perceived as something average and yet extraordinary. Something ordinary and extraordinary, all at the same time. Well, of course, with this rose and the identification with the rose, this takes us back to the first line and especially the thorn. Maybe one of the arguments she's making is, from a distance, I may look beautiful, but as you approach me, be aware, there are thorns. I can be prickly. That's one obvious rendering of this. By the way, her use of thorn, of rose, I think is compelling, and I think it's one that we would want to pay some attention to. Let's just forecast a little bit. For example, poem 34, garlands for queens may be, laurels for rare degree of soul or sword. This poem will end with the rose ordained, and when we meet that passage, we'll come back to passage 19 again. Take a look at poem 35 and her use of rose there. Nobody knows this little rose. It might be a pilgrim bee. I love her returning to this idea of if I'm the rose and nobody knows the rose. That takes us obviously, I'm nobody, who are you, and we're going to have fun there. And then finally, and this is just before the first 50 poems of the Johnson edition, what about poem 44? If she had been the mistletoe and I had been the rose, how gay upon your table my velvet life to close. This idea of identifying with the rose. Now, what's up with that? Well, I think, as I said before, she knows her Dante. And she understands that Dante's journey through the Inferno, through Purgatorio, and then finally to Paradiso, we've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net, culminates with the greatest symbol of Dante, the rose, the multifoliate rose. That symbol of what? Redemption. That symbol of perseverance, of getting through to the end. That is to say, we don't go to hell but through it. There's a lot of thorns that one must bypass to get to the ultimate rose, the multifoliate rose. At 2a, well, what are messages here? I think the argument that she's making is that there's always two sides to all artists. There's the petal, but there's also as well the thorn. And I think the sepal thing is about, you have to peel back the petals to be able to figure out what a great artist is doing, and I'm going to argue that Emily is the greatest of artists. At 2b, I love the rose as a symbol. I want you to study this as we go forward. And all of her references to flowers, I mean, we've already seen a lot of botany references already. She lived in her garden. To borrow from Voltaire's Candide, she cultivated her garden, both literally and, of course, metaphorically. And we're going to pay attention to the way she symbolizes herself and those around her through this depiction of the rose. I also like her very unique language, her specific use of words, and the way in which those words are always built somehow around the whole poem is built in some powerful way around those words. For example, I love in this poem, so much to me in this poem hangs on the word caper, a dance. And I think that's the game that she's playing in her quest for ontological perspicacity. Who am I as a person? I'm a rose. Notice it's a rose, not the rose. Did you see that? At 3A, well, I'd love for us to give some consideration, along with all the other titles that we've mentioned, at 3A, I'd like for us to consider the fact that she loved her Shakespeare. And what is it that her Shakespeare taught her? Well, a number of things, but one of those is that flowers matter, that botany matters. And just start, I mean, think about, for example, Hamlet. Ophelia is handing out all of those different flowers. She will, of course, give Gertrude the daisy. And then she'll go off to die, right, picking flowers. Flowers are a great representation for the Elizabethan audience, and I think the same game is being played. I mean, we can think about in Romeo and Juliet, of course, Friar Lawrence is picking flowers, and of course the power of the petal as it relates to any number of lines from plays of Shakespeare. You can run those to ground. Finally, at 3B, how are we going to own a poem like this? Well, I don't know. I suppose one easy question is, if you had to choose a flower that you are, what would that be? Would it be the rose? Would it be the daisy? What rose would it be? And why would you choose the flower that you chose? And to what degree are you an individual that is both a beautiful petal, a beautiful flower, but also there's some thorn there? And to what degree is there value in the thorns, the theodicy question on our way to ontological perspicacity of our own? Thank you.